Subscribe to the Prepper Historian right now, because what you're about to hear isn't trivia or nostalgia. It's hard-earned knowledge pulled from ration ledgers, civil defence manuals and kitchen diaries that quietly decided who endured the war and who broke under it. If you've ever wondered how civilians survived while armies went hungry, this episode answers that question with uncomfortable clarity. In the winter years of the Second World War, starvation was not just a battlefield problem. Civilians across Europe, Britain and parts of the United States lived under rationing regimes that punished inefficiency and rewarded foresight. Soldiers at the front depended on long supply chains that broke under bombing, weather and miscalculation. Families at home, however, controlled something far more powerful than weapons storage, preservation and discretion. The foods they hid weren't luxuries. They were strategic assets. Understanding why these 8 foods were hidden tells us how ordinary households outperformed armies at basic survival. The reason preserved fats quietly decided who stayed alive. Butter, lard, dripping and rendered animal fat were some of the most aggressively hidden foods of the war. Fats carried more calories per ounce than almost anything else available, and ration books never issued enough to meet human needs. Soldiers often ran calorie deficits during extended operations, but a family with hidden fat could stretch bread, potatoes and vegetables into sustaining meals. Housewives reused bacon grease, buried jars of lard under floorboards and stored butter in brine crocks. From a prepper's perspective, this is a reminder that calories matter more than variety. Rendering fat today, sealing it and storing it cool recreates the single most important civilian advantage of the war years. The reason grains disappeared before shortages became official. Flour, oats, barley and rice were hoarded long before rationing tightened. Families understood something governments were slow to admit. Bread is civilization's backbone. Once grain supplies falter, everything else collapses. Civilians hid sacks of flour in attics and false walls, often grinding grain themselves to avoid detection. Soldiers relied on issued bread or hardtack, which frequently ran short or spoiled. Modern application is simple and uncomfortable. Whole grains store longer than processed flour, and knowing how to mill and bake without electricity remains a survival skill, not a hobby. The reason dried legumes replaced meat without complaint was, honestly, out of pure necessity. Beans, lentils and peas became the silent protein of the home front. Meat rationing hit soldiers hard, especially late in the war, but families who hid dried legumes maintained strength without livestock. These foods were compact, shelf-stable and, easy to disguise. A pot of beans could be stretched for days, fortified with fat and onions. Today, this translates directly into preparedness planning. Legumes remain one of the most efficient ways to store protein without refrigeration, provided you know how to soak, cook, and season them properly. The reason sugar was treated like currency goes far beyond just sweet tooth cravings. Sugar wasn't hidden for sweetness. It was hidden for preservation, energy, and morale. Civilians used sugar to make jams, syrups, and preserves that extended fruit harvests through winter. Soldiers rarely saw sugar in useful quantities during shortages. Families traded it quietly, measured it carefully, and hid it aggressively. For modern survivalists, sugar still functions as a preservation tool and quick energy source. Understanding its non-culinary value is key to replicating WWII level resilience. The reason salt never appeared on the table in full view is, well, rather practical. Salt was essential for curing meat, preserving vegetables, and maintaining health. It was also tightly controlled. Families hid sacks of it because without salt, stored food rots and livestock dies. Soldiers often lacked enough salt during prolonged campaigns, leading to exhaustion and illness. Today, salt remains cheap and overlooked, yet it underpins every preservation method that doesn't rely on electricity. Stockpiling, it is not paranoia, it's historical literacy. Now, the reason root vegetables were treated like insurance policies is really quite simple. Potatoes, turnips, carrots and beets were hidden away in cellars, pits and even buried caches. They survived bombings far better than livestock ever could, and, they required no fuel at all to store. While soldiers had to get by on canned rations that often spoiled or froze, civilians quietly dug up fresh calories even months after harvest. The practical lesson here is clear. If you learn how to store roots properly and understand things like humidity and temperature control, you gain months of food security without relying on technology. Now, the reason canned foods were never really trusted alone was simple. Families hid canned meats, vegetables and soups, but, they never relied on them exclusively. They understood spoilage, dented tins, and, supply uncertainty. Soldiers depended heavily on cans and, honestly, paid the price when shipments failed. Civilians, on the other hand, diversified, pairing cans with dried and preserved foods. Today's parallel is obvious, isn't it? Redundancy matters. Stockpiling just one format of food is a modern mistake the war already warned us against. The reason vinegar quietly preserved entire households is frankly remarkable. Vinegar allowed families to pickle vegetables, preserve eggs, and even sanitize food tools. It rarely appeared on ration lists in sufficient quantities, so it was, hidden and reused endlessly. Soldiers just didn't have access to these preservation methods in the field. Modern preparedness, again, aligns perfectly. Vinegar remains a low-cost, multi-use survival resource that, honestly, deserves more respect than it gets. The uncomfortable truth is this. Soldiers starved not because civilians were selfish, but because centralized systems fail under pressure while decentralized knowledge adapts. Wood families survived by understanding food as strategy, not comfort. They hid what mattered, preserved what endured, and, stayed quiet about it. If this kind of grounded, source-driven history matters to you, subscribe to The Prepper Historian. Share this episode with someone who still thinks preparedness is modern paranoia. And, keep this knowledge alive. History already tested it.